Good morning. Is there anybody out there? It's hard to see with the lights. Reminds me of when I was back in the CIA, and we had to cloak ourselves all the time so that nobody could tell who we were. So yeah, it is really strange looking out there. Some of you are wearing light-colored clothing, and some of you are wearing dark-colored clothing. All I can see is black and white, so it's really, really weird. I'm Bob Flores, in case you couldn't tell from the picture up there. It looks just like me, right? This is Brendan, and Brendan is going to control the little clicker thingy, because I don't have the coordination to do that. So, Brendan?
Sure. Hi. So I'm Brendan Hopper. I'm the general manager of CommBank's Cybersecurity Center. And my job day to day is looking after a team of over 100 people who make sure the Commonwealth Bank is able to detect attacks that people are doing against our customers when they're banking online, as well as against our own computers and infrastructure. So we're constantly monitoring and responding and being ready to defend our customers and ourselves against cyber attack. But given this is a high school event, I figured I might start with a bit of a story about my journey at high school. I'm 35 now. I grew up in a town near Wollongong called Belambie. I went to Corrimal Public School and Corrimal High School. Everyone who I went to school with that I remember was in public housing, as was I, so it wasn't what you'd call an economically advantaged environment. And back then, 20 years ago, it wasn't cool to be a nerd. And to a certain extent, it is very cool to be a nerd now. Some young people might not have realized that, but definitely in the broader world, it's very, very cool to be a nerd. But when I went to school, it wasn't. And there was very little focus at the school I went to on learning. No one turned up to school to learn. No one really went there to seek an education. I did. And to a certain extent, I found computers when I was very young. And computers were a little bit of an escape for me. And this was before the internet was something that was accessible and readily available, which is probably a little bit of an alien concept. But a lot of what I know about computers, I had to teach myself. And to a certain extent, that economic disadvantage of having to teach myself, of not having a lot of formal education around me, unknowingly really set me up for an amazing career in cybersecurity. I finished my HSC in 2001. I started university, but I had to work full-time and go to full-time university in order to pay rent, and I couldn't afford to finish university, so I dropped out. I was very lucky to get a job in IT in 2003, and cybersecurity didn't really exist then. It started to exist in about 2005, and I was already a hobbyist in the space, so I was able to very quickly move in to red team testing and vulnerability research. And that's basically, I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but that's basically being a hacker for good, working out how computers work and being able to break into them before the bad guys do. So I might just talk a little bit about cybersecurity as a whole. And first of all, there's lots of jobs in cybersecurity. And my thinking and lots of thinking is there's never going to be enough people who want to work in cybersecurity to be able to fill all of the jobs. There's always going to be career opportunities here. And one of the reasons for that is that lots of other sorts of science are static, they're unchanging. You're researching how the environment works, you're working out fundamental properties of science, or even in fields like medical research, even though things like diseases and viruses change, they're not actively sitting down and planning how to be more effective. In cybersecurity, we do a kind of science where actually the bad guys are sitting down and planning their next attack. So in a certain sense, careers in cybersecurity will never be redundant. They'll never be automated, although automation plays a very big part. And if you saw the cute cartoons of Bob and I, they weren't actually drawn by hand. We fed all the other cartoons that are in this pack into an AI and basically put a photo of me and Bob in, and that's what it spat out. So technology is changing a lot. And every time technology is invented that helps us do something good, there's always the downside that someone might work out how to abuse it for something bad, which means we really need a generation of people who are trained in cybersecurity and who are making sure that what we build is really safe. And that's to a certain extent what red teamers and penetration testers and good guy hackers do. And in order to be able to defend software, you need to know how to attack it. So you need to work out how to break into things to really be able to stop other people from doing that. But in order to work out how to break into computers and how to misuse them, you sometimes have to develop knowledge that's greater than the person who actually created the system. And lots of people who work in this field, they know software more, or at least certain parts of it, a lot more than the people who created it in the first place. And software is huge. Like Windows 10, for example, is about 50 million lines of code. That's about 2,000 copies of the thickest textbook you've ever seen end to end. And the vulnerabilities that a hacker can actually find and use to break into that software, that could be the computer code equivalent of accidentally putting a comma where you're supposed to put a full stop. In order to do this as a career, if you want to, you need to get really good at self-education, because it's all about what's not in the manual. It's all about what no one else can teach you. It's about what you can discover for yourself. And increasingly, there's lots of sub-specializations of cybersecurity. So people are no longer just, cybersecurity generalists, although we definitely need those. There are people who are attack researchers of particular technology, and there's a real ability at the moment, if you wanted to enter this field after you finished high school, for you to be able to make a real difference by specializing. Bob.
So, before I talk about Chief Information Security Officers, I do have a couple of questions for you in the audience. How many of you are on social media? Come on, hands up. I know all of you are, all right? How many of you have a password that you can pronounce? Change it. Go home, not right now. Go home later, change that password. Make sure it's something that you cannot pronounce, okay? The hackers of the world have figured out how to break in, how to discern pretty much any password that can be pronounced. So you really should change it. And then once you change it, leave it alone. Don't change it to 3 characters. Change it to at least 8 characters. But once you do change it, leave it alone. There's no reason to change it once a week or every 90 days or anything like that, unless then you find evidence that somebody's hacking into your social media account. Then you should change it again. But again, remember, always change it to something that you cannot pronounce. So the easiest way to do that, frankly, is to think of your favorite phrase. Doesn't matter what it is. If you're in the music business, all cars eat, that's the wrong thing, right? All cows eat grass, that's it. That's too short, but think of a phrase that's longer than that, and then just take the first letter or the last letter of each word in the phrase, okay? And then throw some numbers in there and some special characters, exclamation points, hash signs, whatever, and don't write it down. So that's the thing. That's the one lesson I want you to take away from this. Now, Chief Information Security Officers. This is the ultimate goal of almost everybody that goes into the security field. Why? Because they can look across the entire spectrum of security within the environment that they work in, whether that's a bank, whether it's a car dealership, whether it's a government. It doesn't matter. All right? If you have any interest at all in going into the security field, then this is typically what you would aspire to. You may never get there, that's okay, but the education you'll get on the way there is priceless, absolutely priceless. You can see on the screen, I'm not going to read through these things, but you can see on the screen the things that these people do. They have huge jobs. Because they have huge jobs, they're paid very, very well. All right? Australia has traditionally been behind the rest of the world when it comes to this kind of education. That's no longer the case. The high schools and the universities especially have gotten their act together and said, hey, we got to get on the bandwagon here. So now they are putting out people that, quite frankly, now can become an export to Australia. I'm not encouraging everybody to do that. I mean, I love Australia. I think it'd be great to live here permanently. But if you're ever interested in doing international travel and working internationally, this is the job for you. Okay? What do you need to do this job? Well, it's basically what Brendan said. You need to be self-learning. You need to be able to be curious and look at things and try them out and try to do them better than anybody else. A good foundation in maths helps, but frankly, it's not required. Now, don't go back telling your teachers, hey, I don't have to take any more maths anymore, because it is a really big help. Maths is the foundation of most anything, frankly. So I encourage you, if you have any interest at all in the security field, to look into what it takes to become a chief information security officer. Plenty of information on the internet that can tell you exactly what you need to do from a career standpoint, from an education standpoint, and so on. Now I'm going to return to your social media account for a second. And I want you to remember, after you've changed your password, that whatever you do in your social media account is forever. Okay? In CIA, we used to take advantage of this all the time. A lot of the bad guys have social media accounts. They would go in there and post something and say, oops, oh, no, wait, I got to erase that. I shouldn't have posted that. Guess what? It's too late. Okay? The Facebooks of the world and whichever social media you happen to have fallen in love with, all store that stuff permanently. And there's no such thing as it being gone ever. And the intelligence communities of the world understand this. Employers understand this. And so employers are starting to mine social media accounts to see, oh, Brendan wants to come work here. Let's see what he's been doing out on the social media account. Okay, and we find out that Brendan's out there bragging about how he hacked into CBA. Well, that's probably not a good thing, okay? So if you're doing that sort of thing, don't post it on social media. Okay?
That's a very good segue into my first tip if you want to enter cybersecurity. But this is probably a tip even if you don't want to enter cybersecurity. Never break the law on a computer. Never hack without permission. Don't hack your school. Don't hack something. If you find an issue, report it. When I was your age, this kind of misdemeanor wouldn't have the long-lasting effect on your potential career and ability to travel as it does now. In some jurisdictions globally, even minor computer hacking offenses are basically considered to be acts of terrorism. So never, ever hack without permission. You might think it's funny or small scale or your school, but I've seen some really bright students get into a lot of trouble and have a very hard time getting out of that trouble because they've crossed a boundary that they didn't really realize was so serious. Now, counter to that, if you're really interested in this field, you're going to have creative energy. You're going to want to work out how computers work. You're going to want to work out how to subvert them and make them do what you want that they're not supposed to do. There's lots of really interesting things coming online, lots of programs out there where you can let that creative energy out in a way that's beneficial and legal. And an example of that is Bug Crowd. Stick that into Google if you want. But basically that's a site, and there's others, but that's the one I know best, where essentially you can sign up and you get to test real-world applications and real-world websites. And if you find issues, you report them, and you get paid a bounty if you're the first person who discovers it. So you can actually earn money while learning cybersecurity online through platforms like that. And it's a far better way of being able to use that creative energy and learn about cybersecurity than breaking the law. Another thing I'd say is so much of technology is changing. Like the next talk will be about the future of computing and a little bit of artificial intelligence. You saw the pictures of us before that were completely generated by machines feeding photos in, and the other pictures of our cartoons. There's lots of automation. Lots of industries are threatened. So you could end up in a subfield of computing or a subfield of science, or even something else like law that ends up getting automated. That's far less of a risk for cybersecurity. For the point I raised before, there's always going to be bad guys out there trying to work out how to use technology for the wrong reasons. They existed before we had computers. There were people who were breaking the French encryption schemes in the 1850s that the king used to send messages for troop deployment so they could rig the stock market. Way before we had the internet, way before we had computers. There'll be bad guys for as long as we're around, so we really need good guys to be able to understand what they're going to do, be better at it than them, and make sure that we can step in and defend. I'll give you a piece of advice that's a little bit contradictory to Bob, but particularly if you want to start in or be in the very technical parts of cybersecurity or any kind of emerging computing career, focus on mathematics. And mathematics is, in Australia and also globally, not very popular amongst lots of high school age students, lots of university students. I force myself to like it. My wife absolutely hates it. And when I think about why, it's because lots of other fields of study, you can get them right the first time. You can read a book, you can answer a question about the book, and you can be right. In mathematics, to a certain extent, because society teaches us to be right all the time or to try to be perfect, in mathematics you learn by making mistakes. You try a problem 10, 15, 20 times, you get it wrong and wrong and wrong and wrong, and that's actually how you learn. And that's also how you learn how to hack computers and how to do cybersecurity. It's trying and failing over and over and over again until something works. And I constantly educate myself and study, and the one thing I look back that even though I did a lot of maths in high school, more maths education would help me more now, and I wish I had more of it. The final thing I'll say is that I don't think cybersecurity is a human scale problem. And by that I mean using current technology, we can never produce enough graduates to be able to properly scale up defense to be able to meet some of the emerging attacks. And what this means is that we need a new generation, and I really want Australia to be part of creating the innovation that lets this scale far more. And there's a chance in cybersecurity that if you get involved, you could discover something really fundamental. You could be the Albert Einstein of cybersecurity because we haven't had those level of inventions and that level of innovation yet. So there's still a lot of ability in this field for you to really make a difference and make a name for yourself as an individual. Thanks.